Hello, I'm Daniel Cordova, and I'll be reading A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. It was written by Charles Dickens in 1843, and it's a story, not very long, that was written in 5 chapters. So I'll read each chapter and post them all separately so that you can either watch them separately, they're a little bit shorter that way, or all in succession if you choose to. All right, so 5 chapters. The first chapter is titled Marley's Ghost. Marley was dead, to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. Nothing in our story will make sense unless we are all agreed that Marley was dead. Scrooge knew he was dead. Of course he did. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge had signed the death certificate himself. Scrooge never painted out old Marley's name. There it stood, 7 years afterward, above the counting-house door, Scrooge and Marley. He was a tight-fisted old hand, Scrooge, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. But what did Scrooge care? It was the very thing he liked, to warn all human sympathy, to keep its distance. Of all the good days in the year, on Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting-house. It was cold, bleak, biting weather. Foggy withal, the door of Scrooge's office was open that he might keep his eye upon his clerk, Bob Cratchit. Scrooge kept a very small fire in his office, but the clerk's fire was so very much smaller, it looked like it burned only one coal. But Bob Cratchit could not replenish it, for Scrooge kept the coal box locked in his own office. The quiet and gloomy atmosphere was interrupted as a neatly dressed man entered. "A Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you!" cried a cheerful voice. It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew, Fred. "Bah!" said Scrooge. "Humbug!" Scrooge believed that Christmas was a humbug and a time for fools to fall deeper into debt. He and Fred debated the issue, and neither could understand the other's position. Scrooge said that every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart. Fred protested that Christmas is the only time in the long calendar of the year when men and women seem by one consent to open their shut-up hearts freely, and to think of people below them as if they were fellow passengers to the grave, and not another race of creatures bound on other journeys. He said, "And though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe it has done me good and will do me good, and I say God bless it." Fred went on to invite his uncle to Christmas dinner with him and his wife. Scrooge not only declined, he belittled Fred for falling in love and getting married. Fred told him that he held no grudge against his uncle, and he hoped that he would change his mind. He left with a hearty "Merry Christmas." "Good afternoon," replied Scrooge angrily. "And a Happy New Year." "Good afternoon," said Scrooge. Fred wished Bob Cratchit a Merry Christmas as he left. Scrooge muttered, "That's another one, my clerk, with 15 shillings a week and a wife and family, talking about a Merry Christmas." As Fred went out the door, 2 portly gentlemen came in. "Scrooge and Marley's, I believe," said one of the gentlemen, referring to his list in hand. "Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley?" "Mr. Marley has been dead these 7 years," Scrooge replied. "He died 7 years ago this very night." The gentleman informed Scrooge that they were soliciting donations to help feed and clothe the less fortunate at Christmas time. Scrooge asked if there were no prisons or workhouses. Undaunted by this, the gentleman asked how much Scrooge would like to donate. He told them nothing. "You wish to remain anonymous. I wish to be left alone." He said that idle people can go to the workhouses or the prisons. "They would rather die." "Then let them die and decrease the surplus population." The gentlemen realized that they would not get anywhere with Scrooge, and they left hurriedly to call on other businesses. It became darker and colder as the afternoon went on, and there was a faint sound of a child singing a carol at the door. "God rest ye merry gentlemen." Scrooge raised a ruler and scowled at the boy, and the boy stopped his song and went running off in fear. Finally, the end of the workday came. Scrooge put on his coat and hat, and Bob Cratchit grabbed his scarf, snuffed out the candle on his desk. "You'll want all day tomorrow, I suppose," said Scrooge. "If it's quite convenient, sir. It's only once a year." "A poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December," said Scrooge. Scrooge reluctantly agreed to giving his clerk the day off, as long as he started extra early on the day after. The clerk promised that he would, and quickly headed home. Scrooge, on the other hand, took his melancholy dinner in his usual melancholy tavern, and then headed home. His building was old enough now, and dreary enough, and nobody lived in it but Scrooge. There was nothing at all particular about the knocker on the door, except that it was very large. It is also a fact that Scrooge had seen it night and morning every day. So no one can explain how it happened that Scrooge, having his key in the lock of the door, saw the knocker, not a knocker, but Marley's face. It had a dismal light about it, with ghostly spectacles turned up on its ghostly forehead, and though the eyes were wide open, they were perfectly motionless. As Scrooge looked fixedly at the phenomenon, it became a knocker again. Scrooge put the key in the lock, turned it sturdily, walked in, and lighted his candle. He ascended the stairs to his bedroom. It was extremely dark, except for the light of his one candlestick. But darkness is cheap, and Scrooge liked it. It was a wide staircase, and as Scrooge made his way up it, he thought he saw a locomotive hearse going on before him in the gloom. He quickly opened the door to his room and went inside. He examined the room and the bed and the adjoining room to be certain that there were no other surprises waiting. Quite satisfied, he closed the door and double-locked himself in. He put on his dressing gown and slippers and his nightcap and sat down before the fire to take his gruel. And yet, that face of Marley, 7 years dead, came to his mind. "Humbug," said Scrooge. As he threw his head back in the chair, his glance happened to rest upon a bell, an unused service bell on the wall. He saw this bell begin to swing. It swung so softly at the outset that it scarcely made a sound, but soon it rang out loudly, and so did every bell in the house. This might have lasted half a minute or a minute, but it seemed an hour. The bells ceased suddenly together, and they were succeeded by a clanking noise deep down below, as if some person were dragging a heavy chain over the casks in the wine merchant's cellar. He heard the noise, much louder, on the floors below, then coming up the stairs, then coming straight towards his door. "It's humbug still," said Scrooge. "I won't believe it." His color changed, though, when, without pause, it came through the heavy door and passed into the room before his very eyes. The same face, the very same. Marley in his pigtail. The chain he drew was clasped about his middle. It was long and wound about him like a tail, and it was made, for Scrooge observed it closely, of cash boxes, keys, padlocks, and heavy purses. "What do you want with me?" said Scrooge. "Much." It was Marley's voice, no doubt about it. "Who are you?" "In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley." Seeing that Scrooge was not believing him, Marley asked, "What evidence would you have of my reality beyond that of your senses?" "Because," said Scrooge, "a little thing affects the senses. A slight disorder of the stomach makes them cheats. You might be an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of underdone potato. There's more of gravy than of grave about you, whatever you are." The spirit raised a frightful cry and shook its chain. But how much greater was Scrooge's horror when the phantom, taking off the bandage around its head, as if it were too warm to wear indoors, its lower jaw dropped down upon its breast. "Man of the worldly mind," replied the ghost, "do you believe in me or not?" "I do," said Scrooge. "I must. But why do spirits walk the earth, and why do they come to me?" It is required of every man that the spirit within him should walk abroad among his fellow men and travel far and wide. And if that spirit goes not forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death, and witness what it cannot share but might have shared on earth and turned to happiness. You are fettered, said Scrooge, trembling. Tell me why. I wear the chain I forged in life, replied the ghost. I made it link by link, and yard by yard. I forged it of my own free will, and of my own free will I wore it. Oh, that you would know the weight and length of the chain you bear yourself. It was full as heavy and as long as this 7 Christmases ago. You have labored on it since. It is a ponderous chain. Scrooge said, Jacob, Marley, tell me more. Speak comfort to me, Jacob. I have none to give. I cannot rest. I cannot stay. I cannot linger anywhere. And weary journeys lie before me. No rest, no peace. Incessant torture of remorse. But you were always a good man of business, Jacob, faltered Scrooge. Business! Cried the ghost, wringing his hands again. Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence were all my business. How it is that I appear before you in a shape that you can see I may not tell. I have sat invisible beside you many and many a day. I am here tonight to warn you that you have yet a chance and hope of escaping my fate, Ebenezer. You were always a good friend to me, said Scrooge. Thank ye. You will be haunted by 3 spirits. Is that the chance and hope you spoke of? Said Scrooge. It is. I'd rather not. Without their visits, said the ghost, you cannot hope to shun the path I tread. Expect the first tomorrow when the bell tolls 1. Couldn't I take 'em all at once and have it over, Jacob? Asked Scrooge. Expect the second on the next night at the same hour. The third upon the next night when the last stroke of 12 has ceased to vibrate. Look to see me no more, and look that for your own sake you remember what has passed between us. The apparition walked backward from him, and at every step it took, the window raised itself a little, so that when the spectre reached it, it was wide open. Scrooge became sensible of confused noises in the air, sounds of lamentation and regret, wailings inexpressibly sorrowful and self-accusatory. Marley joined the mournful dirge and floated out upon the bleak, dark night. Scrooge followed to the window, desperate in his curiosity. He looked out. The air was filled with phantoms, wandering hither and thither in restless haste, moaning as they went. Every one of them wore chains, like Marley's ghost. Eventually, these creatures faded into the darkness and mist. They and their spirit voices faded together, and the night became as it had been when he walked home. Scrooge closed the window and examined the door by which the ghost had entered. It remained double-locked, as he had locked it with his own hands, and the bolts were undisturbed. He tried to say, "Humbug," but stopped at the first syllable. And being from the emotion he had undergone or the fatigues of the day, went straight to bed without undressing, and fell asleep upon the instant.